All right, good afternoon. My name is Scott Kowalski with the law firm of Penny Livingston, Dawson & Richards here in downtown Lynchburg, Virginia. And I am the Vice Chairman of the Government Relations Committee for the Lynchburg Regional Business Alliance. On behalf of the LRBA and our almost 800 members and their 43,000 plus employees, we welcome you to our 2020 Federal Candidate Forum. The Alliance proudly represents the counties of Amherst, Appomattox, Bedford, and Campbell, and the towns of Alta Vista, Amherst, Appomattox, Bedford, and Brookneal, as well as the city of Lynchburg. Day in and day out, the Alliance works to promote regional economic growth and to enhance the quality of life of all residents in the greater Lynchburg region. At this time of year, however, we like to encourage all of our members, and indeed everyone in the region, to participate in the electoral process, which begins with learning where those running for election or re-election are on issues of importance to the Alliance. And of course, we encourage everyone to show up in November at the polls and cast their ballot for their preferred candidate. Today, we are delighted to have the opportunity to interview Ben Cline, who is the 6th District of Virginia representative in the House of Representatives, and to hear from him why he is running for re-election and what his positions are on issues such as congressional activity during the COVID-19 pandemic, the state of manufacturing, higher education funding, the condition of U.S.-China relations, and more. Ultimately, each interviewee is encouraged to explain his views and why he should earn your vote. Welcome, Representative Cline, to our interview. Before we begin our questions and getting your responses, let's get started by hearing a little bit about you, your background, and why you're running for re-election and what your priorities are.
Well, thanks, Scott, and I want to thank the Business Alliance for sponsoring this forum. It's great to be here in Lynchburg and with Scott across the table, but working on 2 different camera angles here. So it's a great opportunity to connect with the voters and explain to them what we've been working on in Washington, what challenges remain, and how I think I'm best suited to meet those challenges on behalf of the people of Lynchburg. It's been an honor to represent Amherst County just across the river over the past 16 years in the House of Delegates in Richmond, fighting down in the state capitol for the people of Amherst. And I've gotten to know a lot of the issues facing Central Virginia, not only at the state level, but also at the federal level. And then 2 years ago, upon the retirement of Congressman Bob Goodlatte, I was asked to run and decided that being that I've been in service to this community for so long, that this was another form of service that I should undertake to help the folks in this area try and make the federal government work for the people of Central Virginia and not the other way around, because there are too many in Washington who think that the people work for them. And we need to reverse that and restore what was the role of the federal government, which was to work for the people of the United States. And so I've been working over the last 2 years to do that. It's been an honor taking the experience that I've gained, not only working for Congressman Bob Goodlatte for 8 years out of college, learning the issues that are important to the people of Central Virginia, but also the experience I've gained working with folks like Steve Newman, like Kathy Byron in the House of Delegates, and working on issues, from highways and transportation to labor issues to education issues, and now at the federal level, serving on the Judiciary Committee and on the Education and Labor Committee, working for the people of Central Virginia every day. So I'm humbly asking for the votes of the people of Central Virginia again to send me back to Washington to continue to work on the issues that we have sought to address over the past 2 years, helping small businesses, helping the people of Central Virginia beat the COVID pandemic and improve the economy.
Great, thank you, Representative Cline. And speaking of the COVID pandemic, that's our first topic for today. Congressional activity during COVID-19. In the first few months of the pandemic, Congress authorized roughly $3 trillion in coronavirus relief in 4 separate measures. These bills attempt to protect the American economy from long-term harm caused by the stay-at-home orders and respond to the overall impact of the virus. These packages included billions of dollars in aid for testing, education, small business relief, corporate relief, and local and state government assistance. So first question on this topic, Representative Cline, is what is your assessment of the effectiveness of the relief packages that have been implemented thus far?
Well, I believe that they have been effective in addressing several of the immediate concerns that the coronavirus presented when it was first diagnosed or identified back in the spring. The first bill that we addressed sent billions to the CDC and other health agencies to work on and develop a vaccine. We're in the advanced process of developing that vaccine. We're in human trials right now, and hopefully we will be seeing the results of that work. Operation Quick Start, which is what the administration is working on, trying to waive as many of the rules that require a systematic following step by step through the process. What they've done is they've encouraged a general attack on the virus from all sides so that we can develop a vaccine as quickly as possible. So that money was essential to ensuring that our health agencies were on the ball from the very beginning. The CARES Act, which was the larger bill of over $1 trillion, addressed the economic crisis that was developing, because we did have it was a dual crisis that was presented by the virus. Not only did we have a health crisis, and we still do, but we have an economic crisis. And so on the economic side, really it was twofold. The first, the Paycheck Protection Program, which was developed through the CARES Act, went to help small businesses keep their employees on staff and prevented a lot of small businesses either from closing up or from laying off thousands of employees, which would have put them on unemployment rolls, which were already severely burdened as a result of the pandemic. So the second part of the CARES Act was a direct infusion of aid to families and communities with the $1,200 checks that went out. Those were an important lifeline for people who were affected by the pandemic. You know, a lot of the restrictions that were put in place by the states in the beginning of this pandemic forced many businesses to close, and through no fault of their own. So what we're facing now is the need for additional assistance, but it has to be targeted. Not everybody needs another $1,200 check. Not every business needs an additional PPP infusion, but we do need to continue to work toward another coronavirus bill. Hopefully we can get a bill done, but it takes bipartisanship, and that's sorely lacking these days in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Representative Cline. And now as a follow-up to that, you mentioned on another coronavirus relief bill, but considering the impact of these massive relief measures on the deficit and the overall national debt, what can Washington do to avoid having to continue issuing such large relief packages in the future?
Well, that's a very good question, and we do have to be mindful of the limitations fiscally on our ability to spend our way out of this problem. We've provided a lifeline for businesses, for families who were really shut down by this, by the rules and regulations coming out of Richmond and other state capitals at the beginning of this pandemic. Now that we are beginning to open back up again, businesses are opening back up again, schools are starting to open back up again. We have kept the spread of this virus below the limitations of our healthcare system. That was the main goal of the shutdowns. That was why the governor closed down so many businesses and large gatherings. Now that we're able to open back up again, we have to look at other ways to support businesses other than financially. Liability reform is the main key for a lot of these small restaurants, small businesses, because you don't want frivolous lawsuits launched because someone happened to be in a business and later caught COVID and wants to sue the business for not taking appropriate measures to protect them from the virus. This virus is airborne. It's difficult to prevent. We do need to continue to wear masks. We do need to continue to maintain social distancing, but the standards for these frivolous lawsuits can be adjusted, and we should definitely take a look at that. That would help address this, the next step to help businesses without incurring additional burdens on the American taxpayer.
Thank you, Representative Klein. Speaking of businesses, the next topic is going to be the state of U.S. manufacturing. One of the few positive developments during the pandemic has been a renewed interest in seeing more overseas manufacturing return to the United States. First question on this topic is, do you agree that certain manufacturing sectors should be encouraged to return to the U.S., including the production of pharmaceuticals, health and safety products, including personal protective equipment or PPE, and the domestic manufacture of electrical equipment for the electrical grid?
Absolutely. We have, for the last several decades, looked overseas for a lot of our manufacturing. And part of that is due to energy costs and labor costs and other types of costs on manufacturers here domestically. Working in this administration to make the U.S. energy independent, finally we have manufacturing beginning to move back onshore, back into the United States. And that is a wonderful thing because that has such a great cascading effect throughout the U.S. economy, throughout the supply chains that exist with manufacturing. So we want to continue that encouragement for businesses to move their manufacturing back to the United States. And that starts with an energy policy that is an all of the above energy policy. We don't need to start cordoning off or segmenting out our energy industry into areas where we are venturing and encouraging development, encouraging growth, and areas where we're not. My opponent and many others in the Democrat Party would like to adopt a Green New Deal where fossil fuels are verboten and somehow shunned and eliminated. That does not work for the American economy. The American economy will only succeed when we encourage development, yes, of alternative fuels like solar and wind, but they are not as effective or as efficient as fossil fuels. And so we have to continue to having an abundant supply of natural gas, of oil, of coal. Clean coal technology is advancing and should be continued, but also nuclear. We have to continue to pursue additional nuclear power initiatives as well. So if we can get energy policy, the production continued in an aggressive manner, increasing that production, we can continue to have manufacturing move back due to those lower energy costs. We also have to look at how do we reduce labor costs? How do we reduce additional costs of manufacturing? The federal government getting out of the way when it comes to a lot of those costs is a net plus. So on the Education and Labor Committee, I've been working hard to help remove a lot of those barriers and those regulatory barriers for manufacturers to try and help them either stay in this country or to move back to this country. So the Lynchburg region has a vibrant, diverse manufacturing base. We want to continue that. We want to grow that manufacturing to help lower unemployment and provide great jobs with great salaries and benefits for the people of Lynchburg.
Thank you, Representative Cline. And as a follow-up to that, you mentioned energy policy, you mentioned reducing labor costs and labor regulations. What other areas do you think the federal government could or should be involved in to incentivize the return of overseas manufacturing to the U.S.?
Well, we also need to work on improving our infrastructure. When we have a manufacturing base that wants to grow, wants to expand, they're limited by the limitations on our infrastructure. So when it comes to highways, airports, even rail lines, we can help to incentivize development and growth in our infrastructure. Lynchburg is one of the largest cities in the country without an interstate. And that's been a project dating back many, many decades, but it is one that I would like to continue to fight for. We do have a great airport here in Lynchburg. We need to grow that resource, but we can start by just getting back to regular order. So much of what ails this country, so many of the problems that occur in Washington occur because there's been a lack of regular order in the process. As I mentioned earlier, I was honored to work for my predecessor, Congressman Bob Goodlatte, for almost a decade. And during that decade in the 90s, we saw a process that, while partisanship was increasing, it was still largely a process that followed regular order, which means the bills were considered in an appropriate time frame. For example, the Transportation and Infrastructure Bill, which is a 6-year bill and is passed every 6 years, is due for renewal here in the Congress this year. Unfortunately, because of partisan politics, it has not been adopted. So all of these infrastructure projects are waiting. Manufacturing is waiting. The economy is waiting for the great boon that would be created by the passage of the 6-year highway bill. We need to get it done. I believe that I can work across the aisle to help get that done. And that's why I'd like to continue fighting for the people of Lynchburg.
Thank you, Representative Cline. Staying with trade, but moving on to a different aspect, our next topic is the state of U.S.-China relations. Even before the outbreak of the pandemic, the state of U.S.-China trade relations has been volatile, if not bitter. COVID-19 has certainly complicated those relations. Both countries have imposed tariffs on billions of dollars worth of the other country's goods. First question on this topic. Representative Cline, what is your position on allowing Chinese government controlled or directed corporations to invest in certain critical sectors in the United States economy, including infrastructure and information technology? And if you want to directly address Huawei as one component of that, please do so.
Sure. We have to begin from the position that China is not our friend. They are at the very least an adversary, if not an enemy. I am concerned about the degree to which China has been infiltrating and acquiring American businesses, and especially technologies. They have consistently and continue to aggressively engage in the theft of intellectual property of American companies. Huawei is, on the defense side, much greater concern. The technology that has been adopted for implementation of advanced telecommunications throughout Europe was beginning to be adopted in the United States. We have been aggressive in our efforts to put a stop to that with the knowledge that Huawei technology provides backdoors for the Chinese Communist government to infiltrate whatever technology it is incorporated into. And so we have to continue to aggressively block Huawei from being implemented, being acquired, and used in the United States. And we've adopted several legislative initiatives to do that. In terms of intellectual property, I've pursued legislation and continue to look into legislative initiatives that will not only inventory how much of the intellectual property industry in the United States has been stolen by China, but also the degree to which they have infiltrated our universities and continue to work in areas where the acquisition and theft of this intellectual property is an easy process for them, whether it's the sciences in the labs that they're working in engineering and technology in the nuclear industry. A lot of these developments are done in university settings, and we need to get a handle on how these universities are bringing in students from China, and whether or not these students are somehow acquiring and sending back technology back to China. So we do have to take an aggressive step toward China. We do have to continue to treat China as, at the very least, the adversary that it is, and their efforts to a lot of the progress that China has made in their intellectual property theft, in their defense acquisition, and the development of technologies like Huawei has come because of administrations in the past, including the Obama-Biden administration, which was way too friendly with China. We do have to take a stronger step, and this administration, the Trump administration, has taken a stronger step with China.
Thank you, Representative Cline. Now, as a second major question on this topic, you mentioned response to Chinese aggression in trade policy and otherwise. First, what is your position on tariffs and their effectiveness? And a follow-up part of that question would be, if you don't support tariffs or continued tariffs, what alternate means would you use to check the Chinese aggression?
Well, tariffs, first of all, I come at this from a position of a free trade advocate. I'm very supportive of reducing tariffs, reducing government barriers to trade. I believe that through free trade, we get more diversity of product, greater competition, lower prices, and that ultimately benefits consumers, including Americans, including folks right here in Lynchburg. So by opposing tariffs, opposing high taxes, opposing high government regulations, we can help consumers. This president has used tariffs more aggressively than presidents in the past as a tool to bring other countries to the table who traditionally have not been. We have for example, a relationship with China, which has been not only adversarial, but very much disadvantaged. The Americans have been placed in a losing position vis-a-vis China for many years. And that has not been sufficiently addressed until now. Finally, the Trump administration has taken on China, has put tariffs on products to bring nations like China back to the table. And what you have are agreements like the First Step Agreement that the Trump administration reached with China. It needs to go further, but this administration, whether it's renegotiating NAFTA with USMCA, which has benefited American car manufacturers, American farmers, American timber industry, it's been a great tool. He's done that because tariffs are on the table. So using tariffs as a temporary tool to achieve greater successes, reducing those regulations and barriers to entry, that is, I think, an effective use of tariffs. And so I think the president has done a good job. But generally, I am not supportive of tariffs. So if tariffs stay on too long, I do get concerned that they are causing more problems than they solve. So I do support a renewed look at tariffs after a regular interval, so that we can decide whether we need to remove the tariff and continue if negotiations are failing, to make sure we can ultimately move to a lower trade, lower tariff, lower regulatory environment, and freer trade.
Thank you, Representative Cline. Moving on to a new topic now, higher education. The Lynchburg region is blessed to have several excellent private and public institutions of higher learning. Most funding for colleges and universities comes from state allocation of funds, as well as student and parent tuition and fees. First question on this topic is, what do you think has been the main driver or cause of the growth in costs of higher education over the last several decades?
Well, it's a great question, and we are truly blessed in the Lynchburg community to have several great institutions of higher education. Liberty continues to grow and innovate, and it's amazing every time I step on campus to see what new developments are occurring. I was just on the campus of Sweetbriar last week, where they had a new health center being opened in the basement of the old chapel there, so that students can have access to mental health and private sector COVID-related testing, and that will help the students as well. So there are great things happening on our college campuses. Unfortunately, the costs are putting the price of college out of reach for many Americans, including many right here in Lynchburg. Central Virginia Community College does a great job of providing an education. One of the reasons I got on the Education and Labor Committee, and in fact requested and got on the subcommittee on higher education, was because Virginia's 6th district has more colleges and universities than any other congressional district in the country, except for one up in Boston. And so whether it's CVCC, Sweetbriar, Liberty, you're going to be able to get that higher education that you are seeking, provided you can pay for it. Now, the skyrocketing costs that we've seen over the past several years really took off when the federal government replaced private sector lending as the primary lender for college loans. What you had at that point was colleges who were saying, well, if the federal government is now going to not only provide and ensure that these loans are given, but it doesn't matter how much you can borrow as a student, then colleges are free to charge as much as they want to go to their university. So that pressure, downward pressure that was caused by limits on student borrowing from the private sector initially were gone. And so you have this perverse symbiotic relationship where colleges are now charging as much as they want. The federal government is now loaning as much as you need, and students are getting further and further into debt. We have to do something to break that relationship. And my suggestion is to reinsert the private sector into this lending process, because by doing that, we'll reestablish this downward pressure on colleges to keep costs down, to make sure that students are not borrowing more than they can afford to pay back. Unless we want to start making colleges and universities co-sign these loans, which sure would, give a little bit of pressure on these colleges to keep costs down, because students have to pay these loans back. I'm still paying on my student loans for law school, and you just have to make it manageable. The more we can do that, the more affordable college can become for the students, and the more it can benefit the Lynchburg area and our nation as a whole.
Thank you, Representative Cline. As a follow-up to that, you mentioned the federal control of student loans and breaking that control or that monopoly, and also the co-signing of loans by the colleges and universities. Other than those two, do you have any other ideas or proposals that would assist in keeping the cost of tuition lower for residents of the 6th district and also nationwide?
Well, I don't like the bureaucracy of the Department of Education. It's something I would like to get rid of, but I do think that we can, for a temporary measure, before, if the private sector is going to ask those questions of the students when they're borrowing. What are you borrowing this for? What degree are you borrowing this for? Is it a degree that is going to produce income that is going to make it possible for you to pay back this loan? So in place of the private sector doing that, if we're not going to go there right away, then the federal government needs to start asking those questions. Does it mean that somebody majoring in a program that is going to have less earnings potential than another degree program going to be asked to borrow less? Potentially. But you have to make sure that the students are only borrowing what they can afford to pay back. And if you are in a degree program that is going to limit your ability to earn hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay back a loan, then they shouldn't be borrowing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to get the program and take advantage of the education program in the first place. So it's not a great solution, because you're telling some students that they can't borrow as much as others, but it is reality when it comes to earnings after graduation, that not all degrees produce the same amount of income. And the more students can be cognizant of that and see the price point in front of them, the better off they'll be. This applies all across the economy, including healthcare, where we have to begin to reestablish that truth in pricing for this industry.
Thank you, Representative Klein. And as a nice segue, you just introduced us to it. Healthcare is going to be our next topic. First question is a pretty broad question and some specifics on the ACA. So what is your position on healthcare generally? And should the Affordable Care Act be left as is? Should it be modified or should it be repealed? What's your position on that?
Well, healthcare definitely is, as 1/5 of our economy is a major industry and a very complicated industry. And so I've been relying on input from doctors and from others in the healthcare industry, hospitals, to talk about what is wrong with the industry, the direction that it's gone since the ACA, and what solutions need to be restored or put in place to help the healthcare industry do what it does best, which is deliver services to Americans to help them lead healthy lives. And it's very important to differentiate between healthcare and insurance, because a lot of people think that the ACA, by ensuring that people have access to health insurance, have better health care. That's incorrect, because what the ACA has done is really broken a lot of the industry when it comes to the insurance coverage for healthcare. It's disassociated the coverage from the care, and we have to do more to help people get the coverage that's right for them. So the ACA, when it put dozens and dozens of new mandates on health insurers, it ended up largely destroying much of the private health insurance industry. It forced insurance premiums out of reach for many Americans. It made sure that took many policies that Americans loved and took them away, because these health insurance companies could no longer afford to offer these products with the new larger burden of mandates being put on them by the federal government. So you have either increased costs, less choice, and you're forcing a lot of Americans onto Medicaid, which is a temporary solution, but it should not be the permanent solution, and is not the solution for most Americans. Most Americans want a more vibrant choice in healthcare. And so we need to restore a lot of that innovation and that creativity in the health insurance markets. We can also look to ways to lower drug costs. I'm the sponsor of legislation to help patents and generic drugs get to market quicker. And so on the drug side, we do need to see more action there. But in terms of health care itself, we need to do more to help providers and doctors to be able to provide the care to patients. We need to get a lot of the lawsuits out of the way. We need tort reform when it comes to a lot of our health care reform, and placing limits on recoveries and things could be a way to provide the health care reform that we need. But the ACA needs an overhaul. We do have to continue coverage for pre-existing conditions, but that is just one of several different things that we need to do as we move forward reforming our healthcare system.
Thank you, Representative Klein. And you took my follow-up question by hitting on everything that you would mention outside of the ACA. So we'll move on to a new topic now.
Okay.
Broadband and technology. Prior to the pandemic, the Lynchburg region's localities were already working to improve broadband service and coverage. COVID-19's impact on healthcare, on education, on government and industry has made the need for reliable, high-speed internet an essential utility. CARES Act funding has supported state and local governments prioritizing broadband initiatives for telemedicine, for telework, and virtual education. If you could give me your assessment of what the federal government has done thus far to support getting broadband out to those underserved communities, and your assessment of what could and should be done next.
Sure. So the CARES Act, as you said, put forward $200 million toward broadband deployment for telehealth, telemedicine, because in this pandemic, especially out here in our part of the world, we need to be able to access healthcare, access physicians, and much of that can be done for vulnerable populations over broadband, over the internet. So ensuring that broadband is available to areas like the 6th District is important. And we're seeing these localities taking advantage of CARES Act money. Botetourt County over on the western side of the 6th District is using its CARES Act money to expand its broadband network. And so hopefully more people will have access to that. And that brings with it a whole host of opportunities, not just for the healthcare industry, but also for the economy, because more people are working from home. They have to either provide services or attend meetings or you name it, from their computers, from Zoom. So being able to do that via broadband is important. And educationally, we still have many school divisions that are online, and making sure that students can access their classes and get a good education is going to depend on broadband for as long as the pandemic is with us. But even afterward, getting the coursework, getting the assignments, getting the research done that students need to get a good education is going to be over broadband as well. Gosh, it even extends to government. And when it comes to not only the way that things are done correctly, you look at the city council sessions, Lynchburg's doing a great job of broadcasting those. That's a positive way that broadband can be used. And even when it's being done in a negative way, I point to the General Assembly sessions that are being done online, which are very, very harmful to the democratic process. And the way that Congress has also begun to use broadband in some of their committee markups, it takes away the ability of elected officials to represent their constituents well. But when you have rural representatives at a disadvantage in participating in that process because they do not have access to broadband, then it becomes an urban-rural divide, and a divide that affects the legislating process. So you have Northern Virginia representatives more able to participate in the legislative process than representatives from out this way. And in Washington, you have more urban representatives able to participate in committee process, amendments and voting than representatives from rural districts. And that is harmful to the legislative process. We have to ensure that those changes are rolled back, first of all, and we go back to in-person legislating. But second of all, in the meantime, we have to make sure the broadband is deployed for those purposes, because the legislative process has to be a fair and equal process across the board.
Representative Cline, other than just additional funding, is there anything else the federal government could or should do to promote the delivery of broadband to the rural communities in the 6th District and across the Commonwealth?
Well, I think that the federal government does have a role in preventing monopolies from developing, whether it's in the deployment of broadband, and we do see an active federal government when it comes to evaluating mergers in the wireless spectrum, acquisition of wireless telephone companies, and making sure that competition is maintained. But we also have to make sure that in the social media context, that we continue to aggressively encourage competition. I am concerned that several of the platforms, whether it's Google or whether it's Twitter or whether it's Facebook, have developed over the years into pseudo monopolies. I know there's an antitrust lawsuit being launched today by the Department of Justice against Google, and so we're going to see where that goes. But the Judiciary Committee is taking an aggressive step. I'm proud to be on the committee looking into making sure that there is adequate competition to ensure that the online sphere is a robust, competitive, vibrant sphere, and not just several monopolies operating together.
Great, thank you, Representative Cline. We're going to move on now to a new topic, restaurants. In addition to being part of the lifeblood of our communities, U.S. restaurants do over $800 billion worth of business annually, and in 2019 employed over 15 million workers. This industry has been severely impacted by the pandemic, as you know, perhaps as much as any industry in the country. Local and state governments are providing some financial relief and flexibility on offering new dining options. The federal government provided $120 billion in rescue funds, and the SBA provided PPP loans and other loans. The industry itself is continuing to undergo a massive transformation. In June, Representative Blumenauer introduced the Restaurants Act of 2020, and a similar year legislation was introduced by Republican Senator Robert Wicker of Missouri. Several people have signed on to this, including two Democrats and Republicans. The nearly identical bills aim to establish a $120 billion restaurant revitalization fund at the Treasury Department. First question, Representative Cline, are you familiar with the legislation on either side of the House, and do you support the legislation?
Well, I'll take the controversial position that I am for restaurants. I am pro-restaurant. That being said, there are many, many ways that we have helped restaurants thus far. The CARES Act was a major boost to the restaurant industry. It kept so many afloat during that critical spring when the shutdowns were occurring. You know, the requirements that these businesses stop operations, indoor operations, really amounted to taking money away from the potential profits away from these businesses. So what was done by our governor at the state level amounted to a takings, not in so much a legal sense, but in a practical sense. You have businesses that are struggling to make a buck. They want to sell their products. They want to feed Lynchburg and the citizens here. But because of the governor and his mandates, they were not able to do that. So what the CARES Act did was essentially provide compensation for that pseudo takings that occurred. It was a proper and responsible act by the federal government to ensure that those restaurants are made whole. Now that we are opening up again, that's exciting. We want the restaurants to open up. So we want them to be able to make a profit and to keep those individuals on staff. How do we best do that? Is it by providing another round of PPP money or adopting legislation that simply provides grants to restaurants to continue to ensure that they can operate in the black? I don't think that is the long-term, the best way to support our restaurants. I think our restaurants need people in the doors, in the seats, spending their own money. So making sure that we keep taxes low, making sure that we enable people to go to these restaurants, reducing regulations at the state level, opening back up again, so that while we are masked, while we are making sure that we maintain 6 feet and protect ourselves, wash our hands and things like that, we can go back into restaurants and eat again. That's the best way to help the restaurant industry. And when it comes to regulations, things like a $15 minimum wage are very, very detrimental to the restaurant industry. When those restaurants have to pay $15 minimum wage, it comes right off the top, and they have an even harder time making ends meet, paying the rent, and paying for the essentials, and continuing to operate. So avoiding excessive federal regulations, avoiding excessive state regulations, that is another way that we can help ensure that the restaurants continue to thrive here in the city of Lynchburg.
Thank you, Representative Cline. And now we're going to move on to our last topic of the day. It's transportation and the airline industry. And in late May, the News and Advance wrote that despite seeing a dramatic decline in ridership amid the coronavirus pandemic, The Lynchburg Regional Airport will likely end the year with more than $500,000 in surplus funds, thanks to millions of dollars in federal aid. Airport has been awarded more than $6 million as part of the CARES Act. And the director of the Lynchburg Regional Airport indicated that with the help of the CARES Act, the airport will not be seeking city funds to stay afloat and in operation. So, somewhat of a broad question. First, what do you think the state of the airline industry is right now? What do you assess the
Impact is the first relief bill, $25 billion to the airline industry.
Well, the state of the airline industry is precarious. I'll put it that way. It has recovered. The drop, 90% drop that they saw in the spring at Lynchburg Airport is one example of where they saw that level of stoppage in service. We were able, and through the CARES Act, to ensure that they got $6 million to help them recover and continue to operate. And I think that's fantastic. And so the fact that they're back at the level that they were at, or 90% of the level that they were at back in the spring, great. We want to continue to expand Lynchburg's airport, bring in more flights to more localities. I think they've got 3 or 4 flights going to Charlotte, but we need to expand that and not just rely on the private plane marketplace to keep it operating. So bringing in more industry here, bringing in more business is going to help give the airports a reason to expand, to give the airlines a reason to come to Lynchburg. So it all is interconnected, and whether it's more funding for roads and highways to bring businesses in, or continuing to bring down energy costs, continuing to bring down regulations and tariffs and taxes. Those are all combinations of incentives that we can provide to help expand business here locally in the Lynchburg area, create great jobs for Lynchburg citizens, and make sure that the airport continues to succeed as well.
Great. Thank you, Representative Cline. Thank you for being here today. Now I'm going to give you an opportunity to sum up your positions and tell everyone why you're seeking re-election and why they should earn your vote.
Well, it's a great honor to represent the city of Lynchburg, a surrounding community, in the Congress. And for the past 2 years, I've been taking the lessons learned from representing Amherst County in the General Assembly in Richmond and working for my predecessor, Congressman Bob Goodlatte, putting those lessons to work for the people of the greater Lynchburg region. I want to thank the Business Alliance for sponsoring this opportunity. And I'm asking for your vote to continue to fight for the people of Lynchburg. We want to bring good jobs to Lynchburg. We want to bring manufacturing back to Lynchburg that pay good salaries, that have good, strong benefits, and provide an opportunity for families to grow here, and for kids, once they finish the great education that they get here in Lynchburg, whether it's through secondary school, through job training programs, through secondary, through college degree program, to get the education they need to stay. We want them to stay in Lynchburg, to build a business, to build a family, and to be part of this great community. So that is why I'm fighting hard in Congress. I was hitting the ground running from day one, able to get legislation enacted into law that helps businesses here in Lynchburg make it through tough times, whether it's coronavirus or economic downturns, to make sure they can take advantage of trustee programs in the federal government process to emerge out of a potential bankruptcy stronger and able to continue operating. So as the first freshman Republican to get a bill signed into law, I was able to take those experiences, as I said, and put them to good use, hitting the ground running for the people of Lynchburg. I want to continue to fight for the people of Lynchburg, make sure that it continues to stay a great place to live, work, and raise a family. So I humbly ask for your vote this November 3rd.
Great. Thank you, Representative Cline. Take care.
Thank you.